So now that you've seen a little bit about what a future task does in terms of the capability it provides, let's do a deeper dive into its key methods. And there's, again, about a half dozen methods or so that are really interesting here. Here's what the key methods are. You can take a look at the documentation to see more about everything that we're about to cover. So the constructor is actually an interesting method. It is given a callable. If you remember what a callable is, it's an interface that has two-way capabilities. And that callable then will be stashed away and used by the future task later to execute whatever it is the user is trying to call. And the thing that will do that is this method called run, which we'll talk about next. So when you create a future task, you give it a callable, and then you arrange to run the future task, typically in the executor framework, and then it will turn around, the framework will turn around and end up calling the run method on the future task. And what that method will do, it's actually a template method in the Gang of Four template method sense. And it's basically going to forward the call. It's going to forward to the call method on the callable that was passed as a parameter to future task. And it'll also keep track of the result of the computation unless the computation was canceled for some reason. As I mentioned before, there's these other two methods that check to see whether the task was canceled or finished normally. And these are typically methods that you would fill in if you wanted to. You can also cancel a method or cancel a task, indicating whether or not you should interrupt it if it's running or not. So the parameter that's passed here is true if you want the thread to be interrupted, but false if you want to let it complete. And that's a very common technique you see in other cancellation methods that are part of the overall Java executor framework, things like FutureTask, like future, for example. And then there's also a method called get that blocks until the task is finished, and there's a version that will block for a certain time period. By the way, all these methods like is canceled, is done, cancel, get, and so on, those are all methods that are inherited from the future interface, which is actually inherited via runnable future. So runnable future extends future. And then the final method here is called done. And this is really the special method that's not inherited from future. And this is called back in the run hook method if the call method succeeds. So if run calls call on callable and call succeeds, then the done method is called. And typically subclasses override the done method to do something. For example, the executor completion service, which uses all this stuff under the hood, uses the future task done method in order to be able to put the results into the completion queue. So just a note. So this particular future task does a bunch of different things, and you'll see how it gets used more generally here shortly. So that's the end of the quick overview of key methods in Java FutureTask. At this point, you would probably be somewhat mystified how all this stuff works, but of course we will explain that here shortly.